The mid-afternoon sun hung low over the dusty stretch of road that led into Marrow Creek, a place so forgotten by time that most maps had stopped bothering to mention it. The wind blew slow, carrying the bittersweet smell of dry hay, old timber, and silent regret. People went about their business quietly, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered, as if afraid that even their shadows might draw trouble. For years, fear had soaked into the wooden bones of the town, fear of one man, Colt Braxton, the ruthless outlaw who had claimed Marrow Creek as his personal kingdom. No one spoke his name unless forced. No one challenged him unless suicidal. The sheriff had vanished months ago, the mayor stayed locked behind his doors, and every store in town paid taxes to keep Colt and his men from burning their livelihoods to ash. Then, on a Tuesday so ordinary it barely deserved to exist, a tall man with worn boots, a long coat, and eyes that looked like he'd walked through the fires of his past entered Marrow Creek. He carried no visible weapon except the quiet confidence of someone who knew he didn't need to show one. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't give a name. He simply walked. At first, people barely noticed him, just a stranger passing through like countless before him, but something about the air shifted. Mrs. Holloway, the baker, recalled later that the moment he stepped onto Main Street, the wind paused, as if nature itself were taking a breath. Children staring from behind dusty windows felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. He headed straight toward the general store, his footsteps calm, steady, as though he had all the time in the world. When he pushed open the door, the small bell above it jingled, not with its usual weak metallic clink, but with a strange clarity, almost like a warning or a beginning. Inside stood Jonah Pike, the tired old shopkeeper whose hands shook every time Colt's men came demanding supplies for free. Jonah blinked, unsure whether to greet the stranger or ask what business he had. Before he could find words, the stranger quietly placed a canteen on the counter and said in a low, steady voice that carried more weight than the words themselves, "Water refill, please." Jonah nodded shakily and took it. Something about this man unsettled him, but not in a bad way, in a way that made him feel, for the first time in years, that help might have arrived. But hope was a luxury Marrow Creek no longer trusted. Outside, the thunder of hooves shattered the stillness. In an instant, the townspeople froze, the dusty air thickened, and Jonah's face drained of color. Colt Braxton's men were here. 3 riders, mean-eyed and smirking, swaggered into view like wolves arriving at a pen of sheep. Their boots hit the ground with the arrogance of those who believed the world owed them everything. One strode into the general store without knocking. "Afternoon, old man," he drawled, brushing past Jonah and glancing at the stranger. "We're here for our supplies." Jonah trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the canteen. The stranger, still calm, didn't move. The rider squinted at him. "You new here? You look like trouble." Another grunt followed him inside. "Colt won't like some drifter hanging around. Best you head out before sunset." The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he turned slightly, and for a moment just a heartbeat his coat shifted enough for the outlaw to see the handle of a revolver at his hip. Not just any revolver, but one that looked like it had ended more conflicts than started them. The outlaw paled. "Hey now, no need for that, we're just having a conversation." But the stranger's silence wasn't aggression, it was a message. He wasn't afraid. The riders left soon after, but one paused at the doorway. "Colt's gonna hear about you," he sneered. "And when he comes, you better be gone." The stranger finally spoke, his voice cutting through the dusty air like a blade. "Let him come." The words echoed across the quiet store, across the street, across the town itself. Let him come. That night, whispers spread faster than wildfire. Some said the stranger was a bounty hunter. Others said he was a former soldier, a ghost from a war no one survived. A few whispered he might be worse, someone Colt would regret crossing, but no one knew his real name. That made him even more dangerous. By sundown, the sky burned a deep orange, and a cold wind swept through Marrow Creek. Lamps flickered one by one, doors locked, shutters closed. The town braced itself for Colt Braxton's wrath. But the stranger? He sat alone on the porch of the abandoned sheriff's office, watching the darkness settle. He didn't prepare a weapon, didn't set traps, he simply waited, like a man who had faced worse monsters than those riding toward him now. And far beyond the ridge, in the moonlit shadows of the hills, Colt Braxton and a dozen of his men thundered toward Marrow Creek, unaware that this night would mark the beginning of the end, because sometimes destiny doesn't roar into town, it walks. Night fell heavy over Marrow Creek, wrapping the town in a cold stillness that felt almost unnatural, as though the world was holding its breath. Lamps flickered behind shuttered windows as families huddled together, whispering prayers not for salvation, but for survival. The stranger sat on the steps of the old sheriff's office, his silhouette outlined by the dim glow of the moon, unmoving, unshaken. His hat rested low, shielding his eyes, but his senses were sharpened, tuned to the sound of distant hooves, growing louder with every passing second. A storm wasn't coming, something far more dangerous was. From the edge of town, Colt Braxton's gang emerged like shadows ripped from the earth. A dozen men rode behind him, but it was Colt himself who commanded the most fear. He was a brute of a man, broad-shouldered and cruel-eyed, wearing arrogance like a second skin. His reputation alone made strong men weak and weak men disappear. He reined in his horse and studied the stranger with cold amusement. "You must be the fella my boys mentioned," Colt said, stepping forward with a sneer. "Most men know better than to wander into my town." The stranger didn't move, didn't speak. Colt smirked and continued, "I'll give you one chance. Turn around, walk out, forget this place ever existed." For a long moment, silence swallowed the street. The moon hung like a pale witness in the sky. Then the stranger raised his head, and for the first time, Colt saw his eyes tired, burning, determined. "This isn't your town," the stranger said quietly. "It never was." A murmur rippled through Colt's men. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Colt's jaw tightened, rage simmering. "You got a death wish, friend?" "No," the stranger answered. "But you're the one about to run out of time." Colt laughed coldly. "You think you're some kind of hero?" The stranger stood, rising with a calm that chilled even the outlaws watching. "No," he said simply, "just a man tired of bullies." In that moment, Colt Braxton made the worst decision of his life. He drew, lightning fast, deadly, but the stranger was faster. In a single fluid motion so swift the eye barely caught it, the stranger's revolver cleared its holster, and Colt's gun flew from his hand, skidding across the dirt. Gasps echoed throughout the street. Colt staggered back, staring at his shaking fingers as if disbelief alone could undo what had just happened. The stranger's weapon remained steady, unwavering. "Go home," he said. "Leave these people in peace." But Colt Braxton didn't become the most feared outlaw by backing down. Fury twisted his face. He lunged, drawing a knife. Before he even took a full step, a second shot echoed. The knife spun from Colt's grip, clattering harmlessly to the ground. The stranger hadn't moved an inch. "Next one ends it," he warned. The gang froze. Fear real. Primal fear spread across their faces. Most of Colt's men weren't loyal. They were terrified. And terrified men don't fight for long. One by one, they backed away. Some dropped their weapons. Some mounted their horses and disappeared into the night. Within moments, the mighty gang that had ruled Marrow Creek for years was reduced to nothing but shadows, fleeing from a greater darkness, the stranger's resolve. Colt, now alone, trembling from pain and humiliation, glared with hatred so deep it shook the dust beneath him. Who are you?" he rasped. The stranger holstered his weapon. "Someone who used to look the other way," he said. "Not anymore." Colt's fury broke. He swung wildly, an act of desperate pride rather than strategy. The stranger sidestepped, knocked Colt off balance, and with a clean strike, ended the fight. Colt Braxton lay in the dirt, staring up at the sky, defeated not by force, but by a man who refused to fear him. By morning, Colt would face justice. Real justice. Something Marrow Creek hadn't seen in a long, long time. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the town gold, washing away years of darkness in a single stroke of light. As townsfolk cautiously emerged from their homes, their disbelief slowly turned into hope. Jonah Pike was one of the first to approach the stranger, voice trembling with gratitude. "Sir, you saved us." The stranger shook his head. "You were just waiting for someone to remind you that you could fight back." People gathered, offering thanks, tears, and a sense of freedom they had almost forgotten. But the stranger didn't stay to bask in their gratitude. After sunrise, as Marrow Creek began to breathe again, he saddled his horse quietly. Jonah hurried after him. "Will you stay?" We could use someone like you." The stranger adjusted his reins and offered a faint smile. "This town doesn't need a hero, just its people." He tipped his hat, turned toward the open road and spoke his final words. "Take care of each other." Then, without ceremony, he rode away. No name, no reward, no trace. Just a stranger who walked into town and changed everything. And somewhere beyond the hills, as the wind carried the sound of his fading footsteps, Marrow Creek knew one truth for certain. Sometimes the right person arrives exactly when the world needs them most.